Boundaries. Boundaries is a term that you will hear bounded about the place, thrown about. But what does that actually mean for us as individuals? Now, we may put boundaries in place to protect ourselves and the information that we share. We can also put boundaries in around our values and expectations that people may place on you. And that can be with friends, family, a work situation. It's a way that we can protect our energy and protect ourselves to some extent as well. Now, boundaries don't have to be something prickly or like a reinforced fence around ourselves. It can just be about us upholding standards for ourselves and expectations from others as well. So then other people know in their interactions with us when they've gone too far or when they're approaching sensitive areas. And I think in the past, for me personally, I haven't always been clear on what my own boundaries are. And I've found myself oversharing sometimes, but also it can lead to feelings of resentment if you're not clear on what your boundaries are. And then if you're not clear, then how can other people be clear? So when you take some time just to be clear on where you stand, where you draw the line and stand, and then communicating that to other people as well. And I think relating to situations where things have escalated and perhaps I haven't put across my limitations. So I've been that yes person. I've been the person to like, oh yeah, I'll do that. Volunteering for different things when my heart's not really been in it. And then when I feel as though I'm being pulled from pillar to post, then feeling resentment. But in hindsight, how can you be resentful if you've not actually been clear on how much you'd be willing to do? And when you're reaching that limit, because you know what your limit is, but you haven't actually articulated that to somebody else, and then you start reacting in a way that isn't perhaps favorable. So perhaps taking some time and thinking about, okay, where can you pull back a little bit? Where do you feel that you need to pull back? And then being quite clear on where you're at, then you can communicate that to people as well. What I've noticed lately is one of the tools that I've taken previously where I don't have volume on my mobile phone. So whenever text messages come in or I receive emails, I've got that natural time to consider what my response would be. And I've tried to be quite concise in the replies that I send so that information can't be misunderstood. And I know it's difficult with text because obviously you don't know what tone is being typed when you receive a text, but you can be quite considered and measured in some respects with the information that you're choosing to share and being quite clear what you expect them to do with that information as well. So that's a strategy that I've taken from many years ago. Like I say, no volume on my mobile devices, but ultimately taking that time to consider. That gives you that chance where you can articulate what you really want to. I suppose that's the beauty of a text message as well, isn't it, really? Because sometimes when we are talking, we may get caught up in the emotion of that moment. And sometimes you can kick yourself when you walk away thinking, oh, well, I never said what I wanted to say. I wish I'd put it across a different way, which in the heat of the moment, that is what happens as well. So going back to boundaries, where have you found that your boundary line is a little bit blurred or you've not been very clear on where you draw that line. And I can gather and probably guess it would be with those of you of your nearest and dearest, those that know you well, those that know how to sometimes press your buttons, those that get a rise out of you. So thinking about how can you be a little clearer in your communications of when you've overstepped the mark then? How can you verbalize it so then people know how to approach things with you as well? So thinking about it, it doesn't have to be kind of big barricades up, but where do you feel that you could add a little more clarity to communication? So it gives you that time where you can say what's best for you in a way that's not going to offend people. But some people do take offense when you do put in boundaries. And that's another thing as well, is that when you do start, in some respects, finding your voice and articulating what you will and won't put up with, it can get other people's back up. Because usually you wouldn't behave like that. What's happened to you? Why are you behaving like that? When ultimately we could all do with putting some boundaries in place, especially when roles and responsibilities are being put on you, which may in families be the way things have always been. And when you start to deviate from those social norms, you may be seen to be a little difficult when all you're doing is honoring your boundaries and what you're willing and not willing to put up with. And that can only be a good thing. And the more that you do it and get into the habit of doing it, the more easier it'll be in further interactions with people. I know in like work situations where you may have been asked to do something, and it may be something that you've wanted to do initially, but then you realize that more pressure is being put on you, and you feel that because you've already agreed to do it, then therefore then you should just suck it up, you should carry on doing it. And in some respects you could do, but if there's something that isn't sitting right with you, and if it's not a hell yes, then it should be a no. Because if you can't get built up by it to kind of fuel that going forward, then what hope have you got at a later date as well? So thinking about how you can implement boundaries a little more clearly and thinking. So another technique that that's suddenly fallen into my vocabulary lately is when a situation arises, and it could be just in conversations. It doesn't have to be any big life decisions. It could be something that people are talking about, and perhaps it's someone's opinion about something or someone. And I've started categorizing things as a me problem or a them problem. And what I mean by that is, so say someone comes to you with a situation and they're discussing it with you, and you're like, okay, it could be that it couldn't necessarily be the most positive of conversations. And then when you're having that kind of that discussion, is then considering things, okay, well, that's your perception of it. So that sounds like a you problem or a them problem, as in the other people. Now, we have no control over other people's perception or how they perceive a situation. We only have control around our own feelings and how we wish to turn up and interpret things. And if we can sometimes filter things and give ourselves a little space for that objectiveness, and then ultimately that may help us weigh up whether or not we need to be emotionally invested in something or flip our perspective on it and think, okay, well, that's something I've got no control over. That's a them problem. But if it's something that I can manage, something that I can change, then that's a me problem. And then that may help that interaction and help you get some clarity on situations as well. Now, I'm not saying there's any scientific evidence around that. That's just a way that I've been managing some situations personally for me in the last couple of months, just to gain a little perspective and a little objective. Because sometimes we get so sucked into a situation that sometimes it's difficult to take that step back and see the big picture. So think about how you're communicating your boundaries to people. Is there need for you to be a little more clearer on perhaps your values and where you stand on certain things? And then also taking time to consider, is that a me problem or is that a them problem, which has no bearing on me? That is their perspective. It may be their perspective about me, but then that's none of my business that I need to concern myself with if that's their perspective. As long as I know where I stand, and if I'm coming from a genuine position, then that's unshakable because somebody else's perspective of you is just their perspective. And as long as you keep coming and remain centered and true to you, then that's unshakable. And that's my message to you. Where can you reaffirm your boundaries and where can you take that step back to be a little more objective?